So we've got our chart successfully rendering inside of our application. All we need to do now is replicate this 2 more times, once for the pressure and once for the humidity. There's one thing I want you to think about ahead of that though. If we were going to duplicate the spark lines in here in the same file, we would end up with something that looks like this. And this is something that should definitely give you pause. If you ever find yourself replicating some piece of markup in this fashion right here, it's definitely a sign that you're probably going to want to be pulling this out to be a separate component, a reusable component. So I think this would be a really good opportunity to refactor our sparklines code right here into a separate component and reuse that 3 times instead of writing out all this markup right here for defining a single chart 3 times in a row. Okay, so let's get to it. We'll be making a separate component, and as usual, we need to decide whether this is going to be a container or a component. In this case, the choice is going to be a lot easier. We're generating all of our data inside of this function right here, which means we're always going to be passing it directly into the chart. That means that this component, this new chart component we're going to make, doesn't need to talk to Redux at all because it's going to be getting its data from its parent. So we'll just make it a component instead. Inside of my components folder right here, I'm going to make a new directory a new file called chart.js. Now, once we're in here, we need to ask ourselves the question, should this be a class-based component or a function-based component? In this case, we don't need to make any use of state inside of our chart at all, any use of component state. It's going to be just some props come in, we render a component, that's it. No extra, jumping around or any fancy stuff going on at all. So we can really get away with just making a functional component here. Let's throw in some boilerplate to make that happen. At the top, we'll do import React from React, and then we'll export default props, the fat arrow function, and we will return, a div for just right now. Now let's go ahead and copy paste over some of the code that we were using for making a chart. And when you do this, make sure that you clean up the old code. So I'm going to specifically, rather than copy, I should say cut. So I'm going to cut the import statement at the top, paste it in my chart, and I'm going to come back over and cut the sparklines code in here as well. And I'm going to paste it inside of this div. We don't really need this top level div right here, but as you'll see in just a minute, we're going to add another element in here. So I'm going to keep the div around anyways. Okay, so now that we're in here, we've got to just fix a couple loose ends. First off, our component right here is making reference to a variable of temps, which doesn't exist anymore in here. We're going to pass the data in as a property. So instead of saying temps, we'll say props.data because we'll pass it in as a property called data. Next, this is hard-coded for the color red. We probably want to make that available as a level of configuration. So instead of hard-coding it, I'll say props.color. Okay, that looks pretty good. Now we just need to import it back into weather list and make use of it in here. So from here, we'll import chart from up into components chart, up into components chart, and then we'll place our new chart, and it expects 2 properties, a color and some data. So for this first chart that we place here, the property or the data that we're going to pass in is still going to be the temperature, right? We're still rendering a chart for the temperature. So we'll pass in temps, and then we're going to pass in a color as well, and this one will be, let's do orange. And then we'll just do a self-closing tag here for the chart. Okay, I'm going to save this, and let's give it a shot in the browser. So we'll refresh, and let's do a search for Phoenix, Denver, Dallas. Yep, looks like we're still good to go here. So what we did in this section was we refactored out the chart component to be its own separate functional component. This is something that I want you to get really used to finding out over time, or seeing that kind of pattern throughout your different React projects. If you ever see yourself starting to replicate markup in your file, that's definitely a sign that you've got a really good opportunity for doing a refactor into a separate reusable component on your hands. One of the best parts about this is specifically for this chart, this is such a generic component right here that we could really turn this into a reusable component for other projects as well, right? We could really use this sparkline component all over the place because it's so small, there's no additional configuration, it's just very clear, pass in your data, pass your color, and that's pretty much it, you're good to go. Okay, so let's go ahead and continue in the next section where we're going to make a new chart for the temperature, for the pressure and the humidity as well.